I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Hi, it's Dr. Erica Bove. I just had the most amazing conversation with Dr. Tasha Faruqui. Now, she is a pediatrician and a mother of a daughter with an incredibly complex medical condition. And if you're listening to this and you don't yet have children, I don't want you to write this conversation off. There are so many life lessons, wisdom, parallel processes for somebody on the fertility journey and somebody with a family member with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unanswered questions. And this podcast episode is just near and dear to my heart. So please give this a listen. You will not regret it. And thank you to Dr. Tasha from the bottom of my heart. Until the next time. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. I have a distinguished guest today. She is a friend. She is a colleague. She is one of those humans that when you meet them, you know your life is never going to be the same. And so welcome Dr. Tasha Faruqui. She is a pediatrician who was inspired by her father, like me, like I was. Her father was a doctor and a surgeon to an underserved rural community. And Dr. Tasha, she thought her plan was going to be to take over her father's practice once her commitment was complete to the National Health Service Corps. But when her second daughter, Soraya, was born with a rare genetic disorder that still largely remains a mystery, her focus shifted from pediatrics as a medical specialty to supporting parents of medically complex children and those with a limited life expectancy. Today, she's going to share her story, which is her dynamic message of fierce and loving hope to all of us, really. And if you think about it, the fact of having a child with complex needs and so much uncertainty, there's so much to be learned for those of us on the fertility journey, because there's so many parallels and so much wisdom. And so now she is a writer. She has a gorgeous book called Keep Your Head Up, which we'll put all the info in the show notes. She is a speaker. She teaches the medical students. She's just this dynamic force. And so welcome, Dr. Tasha. I just truly cannot wait for the conversation we're about to have.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the wonderful, kind introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met at the Physician Coaching Summit in November of 2025. And like I said, like just when I met her, I just knew my life would never be the same. And so Dr. Tasha, can you tell us a little bit about, your story in terms of, obviously you wrote a whole book about it, but just like how you are where you are today, how you built your family, and, what's going on right now in your life with your daughter, Soraya?
Yes, I think that, how I'm at where I'm at may be like many of our listeners, where you end up on a journey that is not what you had planned for. And I think I initially started out with a whole lot of resistance that this was not going to be my journey. But here I am. And so, my goal and my mission in life was to be a physician. And really, I thought that's where my story would end, that I would get to this place of being in practice, being married and having children, the end. And then I've made it. And I think that when we create these types of scenarios and goals, that we know we miss a lot. And that is, due to a lot of my own protection of my heart, of things that I thought that I could possibly endure. And with having three children, with my middle daughter having a rare disease, it really changed the course of my path, even though I didn't want it to.
Mm.
And so when Soraya was born, I did not have any signs that anything was wrong. I will say that I had this inkling that I felt like my due date was different than what my OB had said. And I remember my OB just reassuring me that I must have had the dates wrong. And I
Mm.
felt like I didn't, but I didn't know how to really advocate for myself to say, like, no, we're two physicians. We definitely know when we can see
Right,
this
right,
is
right.
so planned. But I remember she was always measuring a little small. And so I always had this like gut feeling that something may be off. And when she was born SGA or small for gestational age. And that was also unique in that my oldest daughter was not that. And so I kind of knew enough about medicine where I'm like, oh, I feel like that's different. And I remember questioning that and just really quickly being reassured that since I was petite and my husband was on the smaller side, that, these things can happen. And then I felt like she wasn't feeding very well and she got really tired. And again, I was reassured that, because I'm in pediatrics, I should know that newborns are sleepy and you're good at
Mm,
breastfeeding. You'll figure it out. And by the 2 week appointment, I felt like she was making a weird sound when she would feed. And this was right after I graduated residency. And I still look at our doctor, even though at that point she was my colleague, I looked at her as an attending and she was like, "You've just
mm-hmm.
graduated residency and you
Ugh.
are just overthinking this. If I
Mm,
referred you to ENT, they would laugh at you and they would laugh at me. Like, she'll be fine." Fast forward to the 2 month appointment, and at this point, I can't get her to take a bottle. And my fear is I need to go back to work full time as I have this government commitment with the National Health Service Corps. And again, reassured that she would not starve herself, that she would feed, and that I was just really good at breastfeeding and just giving me a lot of reassurance. And fast forward to the 4 month appointment. At that point, we were force feeding her an ounce, or I should say the daycare was, and my
mm-hmm.
10-hour work days, and then I would nurse all throughout the night. And I just kind of kept trucking along. And at that 4 month appointment, she was officially failure to thrive, where she just
Mm,
wasn't gaining the weight that she needed. And at that point, I was told, you're not giving her enough calories. So you need to give her solid food. And I think at that point, I just felt defeated. I think that, now being in a profession where I see so many women breastfeeding and working, like you just feel like you're not doing enough and that your
mm-hmm.
body's not making enough. And that is the problem. And so I kind of just surrendered to the idea and started giving her solid food. And it
Mm,
was in those first bites that she made this, "Ugh," and that noise, I recognized it as stridor. And while I didn't have the knowledge to know exactly what that meant for Soraya, I knew that something was wrong. And that was kind of like my final draw, where I took a video and I sent it to the pediatrician and actually just said, I need a swallow study. There was no
mm-hmm.
question. And then by the time she was 5 months old, because it took a whole month to schedule, we got in and it showed that she was aspirating. And so that procedure and that visit kind of made a huge shift from a lot of reassurance to everything's fine to a child that's failure to thrive that was born SGA. Now looking back, maybe the dates were off, maybe she wasn't growing very well, feeding issues. And also, she was sweating with feeds, and we went
Mm-hmm.
through a whole medical journey of what does she have. And so things that were really on the top of the list were things like spinal muscular atrophy, then Zellweger's disease, adrenoleukodystrophy, disorder of neurotransmitters, mitochondrial diseases. And that journey lasted about 3 years of
Mm,
looking at every type of study. Now, Soraya is now 13. And so this was, almost 13 years ago where exome studies were new. And we went through that and it was inconclusive at that time. But that was also my first experience with a genetic counselor. And I think from that standpoint, wow, and what they do. And how did I not know this as a pediatrician of what a what a beautiful job. And I say that with just such respect of
mm,
how cutting edge science knowledge you must have, and also realizing that the world of genetics changes as quick as every 2 years, I think is what people say and what I've learned. And then the other aspect of how personal you have to get so fast. I remember the first question they asked is, how many children do you want? And is this it? And I'm just like, what? These are questions that I had never thought about. Well, I did, but of course, everything was going to work out the way that I had planned. And I had
right.
planned for 2 children. And here are my 2 children. And I planned for 2 healthy children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever anybody asks, do you hope for a boy or a girl? I hope for a healthy child. And I
Right.
had not thought of anything going any differently. And so it's truly in that protected space of a genetic counselor that we started our conversations about children. And so kind of, going back to Soraya and where are we now and how did I get to this place where I'm now speaking about it? We went on our medical odyssey. She remained undiagnosed for much of her life. At age of 3, we entered the Undiagnosed Disease Network along with multiple other research studies that were independent and funded by the NIH. And she was progressing in a positive way where she was fed through a G tube, but she was gaining skills as far as walking, talking, would have AFO braces and had an IEP in school, and we had maintained her therapies as her treatment. So OT, PT, speech. She had 9 subspecialists. We were not in and out of the hospital. We were maintaining a very busy outpatient life. And around 2020, when the world shut down and we were doing telehealth, she started having symptoms of fatigue. And that fatigue is such a vague complaint. And with every system impacted in her health, although doing well and not in the hospital, it was her pulmonologist that had recommended getting some imaging of her lungs. And when we went in person to get imaging, and she was going through the tunnel of her MRI, and she was told to take a big breath. That was the first time at age 9 that I realized that there wasn't any chest wall movement. And so that was such a big change. And again, I found myself taking a video of her breathing and realizing that something was off. This time, in sending it to the pulmonologist, he agreed, and we
Mm,
immediately got her in for a sleep study, which we've had numerous before, and she had done fine. But this one did show that she was hypoventilating due to that muscular weakness and that chest wall weakness. And so, at that aspect, we got referred to the NIH to the neuromuscular team, and we knew that this component was new. And this was a change where we were on a different path where things were making a switch. And so in 2021, she started on a BiPAP ventilator. She started using her wheelchair more before she was using it for longer distances. And then she had asked to use it the majority of the time. And then my husband and I started asking the questions, if we're using a ventilator now,
mm,
what's going to happen if this is the new change? And sure enough, it was what was happening was our worst fear. She's declining. And
mm,
so it was us that kind of asked for consultation with palliative care, first with pain, and then eventually with hospice. And so for pediatrics, I just want to make the caveat that at least at our program, you don't have to have a prognosis of 6 months or less. It would be something that is life limiting, and they kind of have multiple pathways where you can be in hospice for a prolonged period of time. And so in 2022, we were kind of given 2 years, and it's 2026. And we're grateful that she is here. However, she is actively declining. And so she's, home on her vent most of the day. And her symptoms really resemble that of adult ALS, where things are just kind of slowly changing. And I guess the perspective of what is slow and what is fast is really based on who's looking at her, or I should
mm,
say, what subspecialty. And we've been on this journey with her. I think as a physician, my call to action of speaking out came to the realization that I was living very two separate lives. One of a physician, where I think that subconsciously or consciously, we are kind of told, check yourself at the door and be of service. And my service is to my clients and my patients. And there is this transactional relationship where they come to me and I must give all of myself without really thinking of the impact of what's happening emotionally. And I did that for some time, but I also knew that there was a disservice to residents of what they didn't know about having a child with complex needs. And so it's almost like two secret lives. Like I was lecturing on the side for the past 10 years to residents on what this was like, but I was never sharing with my families or publicly what was happening. And it wasn't until she was in hospice that I realized I had these other eyes watching me, and those were her siblings. And how you live when you know your child is dying is not only important for me to answer, but for me to be an example to Soraya's sisters. And it was truly then that I realized
mm,
that I don't know how to do this. And if I don't know how to do this, how do other families that don't have a medical degree, as my husband's also a physician. And I decided to go very public with this idea of it may help somebody. And so I
Mm.
couldn't find a book on the space that I now recognize as anticipatory grief. And so I wrote the book, knowing that it's not perfect, knowing that my story is not from an expert, but from a lived experience, that even from my mess up, somebody else can learn from that.
Mm.
And that's really how the book happened. Soraya was also a force behind it, where she wants to be very public about her story. She wants to help other people. And I look at this as her legacy. And I look at legacy as something that can be done while somebody is living. And I love that she got to see this book in publication.
Mm.
And we've created an Instagram community where she is very much a part of. She approves every post and every experience. And I've allowed the siblings to really show power in their story. However, we're still going through it. I mean, there is no
Right.
end to this story. And I think that's the other part. There's no end in the grief, there's no end in the pain, there's no end to any of this. And it's something that we're all choosing to live with. And wow, we each process things very differently. And the sharing has really helped all of us, not just helping strangers.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, when I heard your story for the first time at the conference, it just struck me so much. Like, you and your husband are both physicians. You had these like gut instincts that something wasn't right in the beginning. As we do, as physicians, we're taught to like reassure our patients, when it seems like, oh, there's some out, there's a big spectrum of normal, but like I believe that you and your gut knew that something was not right, like at all these different steps. And I think for our listeners who are struggling with fertility, I think there's a lot of power in that because, most of my listeners are female physicians. They know something is not right in their bodies, right? And it's like, oh, but like on paper, your numbers are this, or your tubes are open, or the sperm are fine, and things aren't moving forward and things aren't connecting. And so I think, there's a lot even to start with, like, okay, how do we as trained physicians navigate our own experiences of, medical problems, right? And how do we advocate for ourselves? How do we communicate what we know? How do we feel like we're not being that? I hear all this all the time, like, I just don't want to be that person. I don't want to be like, I don't want to overstep, or I don't want to, offend, especially those of us in small communities. Oh, but like, she lives 2 streets down or whatever else. Like, there's so much like mind drama we have when it comes to navigating our own health. So, like, based on your experience of navigating Soraya's whole journey, like, what would you say to people who are on the fertility journey, like, not getting answers? They know something's right, treatments aren't working. Like, what would you say to those people in terms of like how to keep going when interacting with the medical system is necessary, usually, for this to move forward? If you're listening right now and finding yourself nodding along, this is usually the moment people realize that they want support that's specific to them. In addition to this podcast, I offer one on one fertility consults where we look at your full picture with both strategy and compassion. You can learn more in the show notes. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
I think that looking at what you're saying in kind of the identities that we hold is really important. I think there's a systemic problem here, right? You mentioned being that patient. The fact that if you're a listener that is a physician and you know exactly what Erica means when she says that patient is part of the problem.
Right.
Like I feel for that patient. That patient is at some point could be all of us, right? But usually that patient is one that is complaining, is one that is complicated, is one that we don't have answers to.
Mm.
And, part of what I do in my lectures is really talking to physicians, our colleagues, and our students of like, tell us more about that patient. Because truly behind that patient is really a story, whether they have been not understood in the past, some sort of medical trauma has happened before, they've been gaslighted before, And so they may come across as really trying to get their point across, but that's usually for a reason because what I have realized is none of us want to be that patient. That
Hmm.
patient doesn't want to be that patient.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I do think that there is a systemic problem of really finding compassion for that patient, for every patient, but including that patient. And when that patient is seeming like, oh my gosh, they have this laundry list, well, they're doing their best to communicate. And I have been that patient. And I will tell you that when it comes to the things that I don't know that are out of my realm, what I have realized is I don't know what's important to share and
Mm-hmm.
what's not. And I realize that medically, this symptom may have nothing to do with whatever, but I feel like I have to do the disclaimer of like, I know, like, this may not fit, but I'm going to just share everything because if I share everything, then I can trust you to kind of put it together. So I do think that one, from a physician aspect, even if you are that patient, when you are a physician, you can be part of the solution. And I have done that where I find that I am so much more patient with my patients because I'm also not immune to any of these stereotypes. So I also like this is not coming from a place of like hierarchy of like, oh, I know better. Oh, no, no. I am equally responsible for being part of the problem of
Hmm.
talking with my colleagues and looking at our patient list, be like, oh my gosh, you know what's on my list? Oh my gosh, that patient.
Hmm.
I'm a part of it, but I'm not anymore. I'm
Hmm.
not anymore. And what I do is when that patient comes in, I take extra time. And I always feel like if we can get behind what is driving that patient to share all these anxieties or be extra anxious or be extra cautious or ask so many questions, if you invest the time, you actually make breakthroughs where you'll create a trust where it changes the relationship
Mm.
completely. And so when it comes to navigating yourself, I think the one thing that I do is there's this like these hats that people talk about of like your patient, you're a doctor, and I have realized to take off all the hats. And I think that when I talk to my physicians, when I talk to Soraya's physicians, I try not to say, like, I'm just a mom. I'm not just a mom. And for anybody listening, you're not just a patient. You are all of the identities and you can't like remove them. So I'll say, I'm worried about the CBC because I know that this number could mean this because I'm a physician. So I'm
Hmm.
not going to play dumb and say I'm just a patient and I want you to walk me through this. I want you to explain to me as a physician why you're not concerned about this because this is my worst fear. So
Right.
if I share with you my worst fear, if you can like reach those head on, then we can get to a place of understanding. And I have found that in my own patients where when they don't have the medical knowledge, but they're fearing this like really abstract thing where I'm like, oh, you're worried about this? Well, let me tell you why that's not going to happen. And if you take that extra 2 minutes to give them proof and
Yes.
evidence, they're like,
Yes.
oh. But if you don't
Yes.
take the time to find out what is your worst fear?
Yes, yes, 100%. I have a patient I can think of recently who met with me so distraught, so distraught. And this person needed donor sperm and was so desperately concerned that we were doing the insemination at the wrong time. Truly, like we are paying $2,000 every single time we do this. I know my body. I know, when I've conceived before. I know what the timing was. I have to fight with the nurses. And I could just see the physiology was not I I swear to God, Tasha, that day she conceived.
Oh my
That
God.
day, that day she conceived. I just saw her for her new
Oh
OB
my
appointment.
gosh.
And I said to her, I said, I think part of this was our conversation because we need to have the guards up when something isn't right.
Yes.
And at the same time, like long term, those guards also are not good for us, kind of like chronic stress is not good for us. So, how can we find a way to find our voice, to find the A team that is going to take care of us in the context of a broken system? It's a really complicated question. And I think part of it is that a lot of the communication, at least in the fertility world, is not happening patient to doctor. A lot of it is nursing, which I have amazing nurses. This is not to say anything about, sometimes though, the question needs to be answered by a physician. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you don't understand your protocols, or you don't understand why your doctor is making certain situations, or why they're not changing something for the next cycle when the previous cycle hasn't worked, has to get on your REI schedule. Because if this is a good connection in the first place, which I hope it is, if it's not, then you find it and you figure it out and you switch. But if this is a good connection, then they will hold you in those questions, like you said. And so I think you're right. A lot of it is the time spent, the questions, you know, getting any complex about being that patient down to say, this is who I am, these are my concerns, I'm really afraid this isn't going to work, and how can we talk about all the things on the table. That's just so brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, and I think that, expectations are really important, right? Like, what does a patient expect? And I think it's good for the physician to know that, because otherwise we can't read each other's minds. And so if a patient is going on a journey with you, what are their expectations? So then that way you're fully aware. I think that if I am in my own head and I'm feeling anxious about, oh my gosh, this next appointment, I have, 10 questions, I think that's part of it, right? Like, my biggest thing is be curious, like always ask questions. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I have 10, that's so many, then I send a message through my chart and I say, listen, I know the time is limited. I think that acknowledging that a physician's time is obviously valuable, but also like time is the limiting step in so many of the reasons why physicians don't take the time to connect. It's not that I truly
Yeah.
feel that physicians aren't lacking compassion. I feel like they're lacking time in a broken system where we are just like also like taught to like spin out patients and get through. We have all these like other things going on. And so sometimes it takes us that minute of, hey, I have these 10 questions. Anything that you can answer ahead of time or anything that we can break
Yes.
down, like let's do it.
Yes.
If you need me to make a multiple appointment, like if you need me to do a telehealth visit or however you want to like bill or do whatever, these are all the things on my mind. And I have
Yes.
found that to be very helpful is even if the doctor that you're going to is not the right person to ask that question, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like I come in with everything, and that really helps one, my anxiety, and two, to help delegate where questions go. And then my other advice would be to be an over communicator because the other big crack in our system is communication, not only between the physician and the patient, but physician to physician. So, if you've got your OB
Yes.
working with your REI, like, I
Yes.
hate to say it, like, yes, it should be physician to physician, but that's not happening. And so you
Correct.
truly have to be your own social worker. You truly have to be your own advocate. And one, it can be empowering, and two, yes, it's exhausting. And so I think that we can acknowledge that both can be true. But that is truly the way that I feel like care has to be until the system can be improved. And I found that to be helpful where even if it's a different system, if we're seeing GI, but I need a pain medication, well, really that pain medication is going to cause psoriatic constipation. So I go ahead and send GI information like, hey, I know you've written for the Senna, but
Mm.
we just went up on this pain medication. So I may be asking you in a month to go up on it. And
Right.
you know what? If it's just an FYI, great. But I
Yeah.
feel like I want to do everything I can for my daughter. And I think the other thing that she's taught me is treat yourself like you would your own child. Because I think as
Mm.
a parent, sometimes we don't do that.
It's so true. Yeah, and I think about, within REI, like there's so many people that we interface with. Say somebody has a coagulability disorder and we're trying to figure out like the, Lovenox situation or something else, or say somebody has either on rheumatology meds and it's like, oh, these are kind of, we don't have all the data, we don't know, or I mean, oncofertility, I think we've worked out better because I think people understand what a time sensitive, situation that is. And there's patient navigators many places, and somehow people find the time for the oncofertility. However, it's like the more, run of the mill, regular complex patients, all of infertility is complex. I mean, most of
I
my
like how you're
new
like run of
patients,
the mill
well,
complex.
run of the mill, like most of my new patients are like a level 5 because like there's just so much to talk about. I find too, like this comes into play when it's like, I have a fibroid and like Does it affect the cavity? Does it not? The surgeon has one opinion. The REI has another opinion. Maybe somebody gets a second or third opinion in there. And again, rightly so, but it's like, what do I do? And I think that gets really complicated. And so that is actually one thing at Love and Science that I try to do, is to say, I understand your REI does not have a ton of time. I am an REI and a coach. I will put this in perspective. I will not be the one making the choices, but I can explain the studies. I can explain the protocols. I can tell you how I think about fibroids and impact on cavity and proximity and location and size and all those things. And I find that for female physicians, just having that like context, if you're an ICU doctor or a cardiologist or a pediatrician, you're like, I never learned this in medical school.
Right.
But I think, and maybe you can speak to this too, like, I think as physicians, we almost have like a second layer of self-judgment. Like, I should understand this better, or I should be able to, and like ultimately shouldering the responsibility for everything going well in ourselves, even though, yes, we can't divorce being the patient and the doctor at the same time, but we have this like added weight of responsibility that I think makes it even harder.
1000%. And
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but I also think that, again, there is implicit bias even with physicians, where
Yep.
when they are communicating with me, there is this aspect of they can't unsee the physician for better or for
Right.
worse. And so I think that is, again, an important acknowledgement.
Yeah. So much good stuff. I mean, I think one of my favorite things to talk about is balancing trust and advocacy. And I mean, you with a situation that is so complex and daily, right? You navigate that with so much like fierce mama bear energy and so much grace. I think we can all learn so much from you and how you have navigated and continue to navigate on a daily basis.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what you call anticipatory grief. And
Yes.
I think that, in the fertility world, when I meet somebody and their treatments aren't working, their deepest fear is that it's already happened, that it hasn't worked. They're like, I've done 4 transfers, they haven't stuck. All I've ever wanted, like you, is to be a mom. And I'm feeling incredibly threatened, hopeless, defeated, right? You mentioned that word before. Like, this is how I'm feeling. I can't see a world in which I become a mom or I have a second kid. And that state, that place is so lonely. It's so dark. Even if somebody from the outside world can say, these are the reasons I think it makes a sense to keep going, the lived experience of many of the listeners is like, I just can't see how it's going to work. And I think if you look at, there's a lot of parallels, not exactly the same to be clear, but with palliative care and infertility, because in palliative care, it's a diagnosis that nobody expected, nobody wanted. There's so many uncertainties. Like you said, the timeline was 2 years, and now here we are 4 years later. Like, there's just so many unknowns. Similarly, in the fertility world, it's like, okay, well, try another cycle, try another transfer. We hope it works. At best, it's going to work 50% of the time, like whatever the stats are. And it's just this very uncomfortable space. And so, what can we even like define anticipatory grief? Like, what is it, and how have you learned to live daily in the face of what might be to come, even if that's not entirely clear?
Wow, that's a very loaded question.
I know. We
But
can break it up.
let's break it up. And I think one of the things that I really want to put words to is, prior to Soraya being in palliative care and hospice, I will tell you I have been grieving. And so
Mm,
the way that I identify what I have been feeling with having her in my life is a grief. And it's like I feel guilty about saying that because yes, I have a child. Yes, I have a child that has a rare disease. And before I knew that it was life limiting, I truly thought that she would be living a long life with
mm,
complex needs, one that would change the course of how we live, how we retire, um, what her life would look like. And there's grief in that. And so
yeah.
I knew that the second that Soraya had something that was different, I grieved. I grieved the other child. That grief has been with me and has never gone away. And that doesn't discredit the love that I have for Soraya. It is subconscious that from the second that I knew I was pregnant, I created a dream, not a gender, but I had glimpses of just images of what they would be like, who they would play with, what our life would be like as a family. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't want to have this like path, but I realized that when Soraya was not going to be on this neurotypical path, I was still grieving this other kid that never came to fruition. And throughout Soraya's life, again, even before I knew that she was in palliative care, I was still grieving all of the neurotypical experiences that I thought that she would have.
Mm.
When I would see her in a wheelchair at her choir concert, I would have this quick glimpse of what would this child look like if she was neurotypical. And I would be so sad about that child, but then I'd feel such guilt because I have her. But I don't think that that grief ever goes away. I think that is something that I will always feel, um, because that idea was something that was very real to me, that I carried for those 10 months and 10 months plus, because even when there were signs of something not quite being typical of Soraya, there was still a hope that we could fix it. And again, that is not to discredit the whole population of people that have disabilities. But when I say that I had wished for a healthy child, I'm going to be honest that that is what I wished for. And so that grief was something that I could quickly identify pretty early on that I knew that I was carrying. And throughout her journey of growth, I knew that there were different moments that would hit me of grief of the child that I thought that I was going to have. And I was also learning to love and grow and the possibilities of, wow, I didn't know that there was a love like this that I could ever imagine, or just how you cannot put limits on a child that doesn't have a trajectory because you just don't know, and truly how to live with uncertainty. There's no textbook, there's no path, you don't know what to expect. And so
Mm.
while that is terrifying to live with uncertainty, there is some beauty of surrendering that
Yeah.
is something that I could not have been taught in any other way. When it comes to Soraya and truly realizing that she has a life-limiting illness, that surely that it will be her respiratory status that will be her demise. There's no, medicine around that. Her lungs are getting weaker. She is needing her vent more often, and she has decided that she does not want to trach. So we know that this will happen when we don't know. And so this space of knowing that her life will be limited, but not knowing when,
Right.
and we still have jobs and we have life. So even if you take away my job, how will I live in this space? And so that space of is what I call anticipatory grief. I'm anticipating that she will die sooner than expected because again, we will all die, but
Right.
sooner than I would have ever imagined. And life is happening right now. So there's no pause button. And I've wanted a fast forward where it's almost like this is also like a raw, real thing where I have thought about, well, maybe if I fast forward until she passes away, then I can just move on with it. And these are
Mm.
all lies that will never be true, that there is no discrete ending, that even after she's gone, there's going to be a whole different journey that I don't even know about. And I have surrendered to the fact that I won't be able to know what that experience is like until it happens. But this space requires me to live and to show up in a way, not only for Soraya, because she doesn't want me to crawl under a table and not come out, because that's really what I want to do. Her sisters deserve to not have their life on hold. They deserve to have life carry on, but not in a way where Soraya is not a part of it or she doesn't exist. And so we're all trying to figure that out. But the biggest thing that we're doing is put one foot in front of the other. There's an element of being so present in the right now and then anticipating Soraya's next need and also knowing that we might not get it right. And I've let go of these future plans, which is really hard to do as a physician. I think
Yeah.
innately we're planners. I am a delayed gratification type of person, and I don't have space for that anymore. I have to do some really joyful things right now because I realize there isn't a discrete end to this suffering and this pain that I must get it now. And we don't have to feel guilty that that you have to be done with one thing before you can have the other, that truly
Mm.
like we have to have both. And it's also something that is very, very active and not passive. And I think that prior to Soraya being in hospice, I really felt that like joy would come to me, that like I am just waiting and like, my life sucks and soon something good will happen to me. And I
Right.
think that it is so much more active and intentional than that, that like, yes, there's a lot of pain and suffering in our home, but I must go find out ways to make joy happen. And that definition of joy is going to look so different based on what's happening in our life. And we will make it happen. We will make it happen. And so that is
Mm.
the space that we're in. And I am, again, going to say I have no idea what I'm doing. But if somebody else can learn from the grief and the pain and the suffering of how we do it, then maybe it will help them. Maybe one element of what I'm saying will resonate, and maybe that can be helpful. Or maybe someone's listening and be like, oh, I would do it totally different. And that's wonderful because I think what I didn't have was a framework. There's no
Right.
algorithm for this. I don't know. I don't know one other person. I don't.
Right.
And for that,
Absolutely.
yeah. So for
Absolutely.
that, here's a framework. It's messy.
Yeah.
And we're doing it. So here we go. And I think the other things that I have learned is not only meeting Soraya where she's at, but meet yourself where you're at. Like, what do you need right now? And have that same compassion for yourself. And that has been probably the hardest lesson. And just realizing that what you need in this moment may look very different than what you need 6 months from now, and that's okay. I'm such, again, such a planner of like, this is how I want my life to be. And that's not really how life works. And to be adaptable is so hard for me.
It's so hard. I mean, and we can
It's
talk
so
about your book
hard.
too, but like, I think what's really coming up for me, as you say, like meeting yourself where you are, is like, spoiler alert, like, oh my goodness, I'm a human being after all. Like, you know
Human
what I mean?
aspect is the
And
hardest. It's
it's
the hardest.
so
The
hard. And
hardest.
like, as doctors, that's like beat out of us. Like, it's just
Totally.
beaten out of us.
to-
And
Totally beat it out. And it
for
almost makes
many
you a
people,
better doctor. A better doctor if you beat. I mean,
no.
that's like the idea,
that's
though. That's
that's
the
that's the
idea.
ideal. And so I think for many people, this infertility journey is the first time that that equation of like work harder, it'll pan out. I mean, like we said in your
Yes.
book, like your biggest concern was like being in the same place with your husband because your schedules were so complex and military and service commitments and everything and different stages of training. And I mean, I relate to that because that's what my former spouse and I did. It was like so tunnel vision. As long as we're gonna ultimately be together, it's gonna be okay. And then you don't even like, but it's like this robotic like lists and planning and everything. And then like life happens. Like I love how at the end of every chapter you say like, and this is like a universal takeaway. This is like a life lesson that I learned based on this vignette of this part of my life, because it's wrestling with our humanity. I say nobody in their right mind would ever choose to be on the fertility journey. It is hell. It is horrible. Like it's just horrible. And at the same time, how can we walk this path and have it not take everything from us, right? I don't want my patients or my clients to get to this finish line of having a heartbeat and moving forward and just being like, just completely like a skeleton version of themselves and having just like having infertility taken everything. It's like, well, what's the point in that? Like what you've done, it's like, how can you use this experience to transform you? How can you literally suck the joy of the life now? How can you be intentional about that? And that takes some outside the box thinking. It's like, how can I organize a trip, that we would never take in a million years and figure out the logistics and all of that? How can we find joy in a small moment that otherwise might not get attention, but that, what do I need in this moment? That can only happen in the space of humanity. That can
Yes.
only happen of like me in this body today. Like, what am I feeling? What do I need? How can I make that happen both for myself and the other humans that I've invited or who have been placed in my life on this wild journey, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this anticipatory grief, I think, again, not every parallel is the same, but I think, when I was doing some research on this concept before our conversation, it sort of came up that there's an emotional aspect, which is the feelings part of things. We have to feel the feelings. There's this cognitive behavioral experience of like already living that future reality. And for many of my clients and my patients, it's, maybe this isn't going to happen for me. And that feels very real in this moment. It's, I always dreamed of a family of 4 children, and now I'd be lucky to have one. I mean, all of that is grief. And as I say all the time, the only way through grief is grief. We cannot side skirt it. We can't. It's going to come and get us. It's going to come and get us. And so we have to go through it. It's the only way. And I think it takes a lot of courage and bravery, but we also can't do it alone either.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. And it's just, I do see like you're like living, but you are also grieving what's to come. And you're grieving somebody before they're actually gone. And you may be grieving a child before they're actually conceived. Like
Right.
all of
Right.
it. Or once they're conceived, you're already imagining it's not going to work out. And so you
Exactly.
could be grieving that whole time.
It's so true. And I think the third, again, this is my preliminary research, and I do not live what you lived. I will share that when I was 3.5, my family lost a child at 2 months of H flu meningitis, right as the vaccine was coming out. And so I remember actually a lot from that time. I had another sister who was about 2 years younger than me. And then it was the sister who had just been born who passed away. And I watched my whole family come together during that time. And so there's no way you can anticipate when a 2-month old gets sick all of a sudden. That all happened very suddenly. But my family is still grieving. We still grieve, and it's the birthdays roll around, the anniversaries roll around, as we have other medical experiences in our family, and new life happens. That experience has colored our reality. And so how do we, and interestingly, like my mother had a procedure last week, and it was actually on the anniversary of like the birth of that child. And I
Mm.
was really anxious about that procedure because there's, again, us physicians, medicine, so many unknowns. And I just thought, like, her spirit is going to help her through. Like, my mother birthed her on that day, and she's going to take care of her, so there's so much bigger than us. And I think what we need to do is figure out, like, how can we be the best versions of ourselves in this experience? How can we let this suffering transform us? And a lot of that is being very intentional about the joy, like you said. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, make your joy 10 list. Maybe it's you love seeing flowers. Maybe it's you really savor a hot cup of coffee or tea. Maybe it's you forgot what it's like to sit in a corner and read a book with a soft blanket on your lap, and make time for 15 minutes in a day. Like, even it doesn't even need to be like going halfway around the world and having this huge experience. But I think if we can carve out space for joy every day, it's like a buffer. It's also like a act of resistance. It's like, this experience is not going to
Take
take
me.
it all, you know?
Yes.
So yeah.
But something that you said, I think, is really helpful. One that you share a story of, your sibling at two
Yeah.
months old.
Yeah.
And I think that there is this, misconception of grief that like, oh, how are your parents still grieving? Like it's so long. And so I think that acknowledging that is really helpful in just changing our view of what grief is and what quote unquote should be done. I still to this day remember the most beautiful thing that my OB-GYN said to me after my miscarriage. I had a miscarriage in the first trimester, and it was before before my oldest was born. So it was my first pregnancy. I was on call when I was miscarrying as an intern, and I like could not tell my chief resident, and I was actively bleeding, and my husband was doing an away rotation, and I had messaged my OB who met me post call like at the same hospital and did an ultrasound. And I was a wreck, but I was a wreck for weeks. And I remember feeling like, why do I feel so much sadness when I wasn't even that far along? Like, this was the message in my mind. And the grief was debilitating. And I just felt like so alone. And as I was sharing with people what was happening is when people were like, "Oh yeah, I've had miscarriages." And so then it was just like, why are we not talking about this grief? But the most important thing that the OB-GYN said to me is that she has felt that people that grieve in their first trimester of pregnancy can be very similar to their 36th week of pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that actually was the acknowledgement that I needed. Like that to me, I just felt such a relief. I'm like, oh my God, because I just feel so guilty. Like all the things haven't even been formed. Why am I? It's almost like I
Right.
wanted to just push it away. And so I think that just acknowledging that is just so beautiful that you do. And I'm sure for your listeners, they get that from you if they have a provider like you. And I'm hoping that people have physicians that can share these tidbits because those are the things that really got me through. Like just that sentence is what really got me through.
Yeah. And I think, I've gone through it too, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, there's just this humanity and the experience of just acknowledging the suffering and acknowledging how hard it is that, connects us. And when we can connect and bear these burdens together, I do think that in some way it lightens the load.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Tasha, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
I would just say that if you are struggling or feeling alone, I do not want anyone to feel the pressure to share their story. I think that sometimes when I am speaking and I'm sharing, that I have gotten some responses from listeners that have been like, oh my gosh, I'm going through this, but I could never share. And I just want to say that everybody experiences their experience differently and that not everybody needs to feel like that they have to share, that these things are so private and they're actually like sacred experiences, and that everybody can experience things and process things very differently. And that my intent in sharing my story is never to feel to move others to do the same, that this is not a movement in that, but really a testament of how unique our experiences are. But really, there are some universal features that can really connect us. So,
Yeah.
just
And
so I'm clear with my intent, because I think
no, thank you.
it's hard when I'm like, oh, you're writing a book, you're talking, and what is my intent? And my intent is not to move people to all do the same, but really to put myself out there because this is what Soraya wants. Um, I also feel very moved to do it in the sense of I know how lonely I felt, and this is one way that I
Mhm.
can combat that. And for somebody else listening, it may be that they share with one person and that may feel the same feeling that I get when I share on a podcast, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I'm just going to put a huge plug in for your book. It's called Keep Your Head Up, A Mother's Story of Chasing Joy in the Face of Grief by Dr. Tasha Faruqui. It is a gem. I mean, I just like almost like I was savoring a delicious truffle. I just so looked forward to every time I got to pick up the book again. And I mean, those of us who are in similar generations, like all the chapters are based on songs that, really resonate with a lot of my youth and upbringing. And there's just so many gems. I actually can't wait to read it again. I bought it for my sister. Like, it is so well written, and for any physician, anybody really, but any physician specifically, because I think there's so much in it that is like, how do I be this physician patient, right? And how do I, let go of the life that I had planned and surrender that and welcome what's here and do that. But I mean, there's so many, not having all the answers, and there's so many themes that are so beautiful. It's so beautifully written. So please get this book and follow Dr. Faruqui on Instagram. We'll have all the information in the show notes. But truly, Dr. Tasha, I am so blessed to know you, and I am so grateful that you shared your story with our listeners. And I just look forward to continued connections because we are connected, we are stronger together. And just thank you again for being you.
Thank you so much for having me. And for those that purchase the book, please know that I'm donating all proceeds to nonprofit organizations for children. So just know that it'll go back because the plan was not for me to be an author. So I'm not doing that as my day job, but it is a part of our story. And so thank you for the support in any way to help other children.
Amazing. Again, thanks, Dr. Tasha. And to all my listeners, you know how much I love you. Until the next time, bye.